The gavel echoed through the suffocating courtroom as my sister Charlotte stood triumphantly beside her lawyer, pointing directly at me with a victorious sneer. "Finally, your house is mine," she declared, her voice dripping with satisfaction. My parents, Harold and Dorothy, burst into applause from the gallery, their faces beaming with pride, as if their daughter had just won an Olympic gold medal. I stood there silently, my throat constricted with disbelief, watching 3 years of caring for grandmother Sarah crumble into dust. Then Judge Patricia Hawkins looked up from the documents with a puzzled expression, adjusting her reading glasses. "Wait, one of the 12 properties, I see. I would love to take a look at this." The words hit the courtroom like a lightning strike. 12 properties. I felt my knees nearly buckle as confusion swept across every face in the room. Charlotte's confident smile flickered for just a moment before she regained her composure, but I caught that brief flash of uncertainty. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. 3 years ago, I received a phone call that changed everything. Grandmother Sarah, the woman who had raised me during my difficult teenage years when my parents were too busy favoring Charlotte, had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. At 32, I was working as an accountant at Henderson & Associates, living in a modest apartment downtown, when I learned that the strongest woman I knew was beginning to fade. Charlotte lived in Seattle, then building what she called her important career in marketing for a tech startup. She visited grandmother Sarah exactly twice during those 3 years. Twice. I remember each visit because they were such rare occasions that they felt like solar eclipses. Meanwhile, I moved into the small guest bedroom of grandmother Sarah's house on Maple Street, the same house where I had spent countless summers learning to fish, helping with her garden, and listening to her stories about surviving the Great Depression. My parents, Harold and Dorothy, had always made their preference clear. Charlotte was their golden child, the one with the college degree from an expensive university, the one who sent Christmas cards with photos of her Seattle apartment overlooking Puget Sound. I was the steady one, the reliable one, the one they called when they needed help, but never praised for providing it. During those 3 years, I watched grandmother Sarah's mind slip away in fragments. Some days she remembered everything perfectly, telling me about her late husband's construction business and how they had saved every penny. Other days, she would ask me who I was, then remember an hour later and apologize with tears in her eyes. Through it all, I made sure she took her medications, attended her doctor appointments, and never felt alone. The funeral had been a circus. Charlotte arrived wearing a black designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief while accepting condolences from neighbors who barely recognized her. She gave a eulogy about how much she loved grandmother Sarah, how she regretted not spending more time together, how distance had kept them apart. I sat in the front pew, biting my tongue. A week later, we gathered in the cramped office of family lawyer Benjamin Walsh, a man in his 70s who had handled grandmother Sarah's legal affairs for decades. The office smelled of old leather and coffee that had been brewing too long. Benjamin adjusted his thick glasses and read the will in his monotone voice, explaining that the property on Maple Street was being left to Charlotte. I felt the air leave my lungs. 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of being the only family member who truly cared, and grandmother Sarah had left everything to the granddaughter who could not even be bothered to call regularly. Charlotte had smiled that same triumphant smile while my parents patted her shoulder and congratulated her on her inheritance. But none of us had questioned the phrase, the property on Maple Street. We all assumed it meant the house, the only property any of us knew grandmother Sarah owned. We were wrong. Now in this courtroom, Judge Patricia Hawkins was carefully examining the legal documents with the intensity of a detective studying evidence. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a professional bun and eyes that missed nothing. She had been presiding over probate cases for over 20 years, and something in the will had caught her attention. "Bailiff, please ask the court clerk to retrieve the complete estate documentation," Judge Hawkins said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "I need to see every addendum, every codicil, every piece of paper related to this inheritance." Charlotte's lawyer, a nervous young man named Timothy, who looked like he had just graduated from law school, shuffled through his papers. Frantically. "Your Honor, we have everything that was provided by the estate attorney." "That may be what you have, Counselor, but I am seeing references here that suggest this is incomplete," the judge replied, her tone growing more serious. "This will mention property transfers dating back 15 years, multiple deed recordings, and what appears to be a substantial real estate portfolio." The court clerk, a efficient woman named Amanda with short brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses, hurried to a filing cabinet at the back of the courtroom. She returned with a thick folder that looked like it could choke a horse. As she handed it to Judge Hawkins, I saw Charlotte's confident smirk beginning to fade around the edges. My parents, Harold and Dorothy, were whispering frantically to each other in the gallery. Harold, a retired insurance adjuster with a carefully maintained mustache, kept adjusting his tie nervously. Dorothy, who had worked as a bank teller for 30 years before retirement, was wringing her hands. In that way she did when she was deeply worried about money. Judge Hawkins opened the thick folder and began reading in silence, her eyebrows rising progressively higher with each page she turned. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking, counting down the seconds, until our family's world would change forever. "I am going to need time to review these documents thoroughly," Judge Hawkins announced, finally looking up at all of us with an expression that suggested she had discovered something significant. "This case is more complex than initially presented. Court is adjourned for 3 days while I examine the complete estate records." As we filed out of the courtroom, Charlotte grabbed my arm, roughly, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. "Do not get your hopes up, Reginald," she hissed, her voice low enough that our parents could not hear. "That house is mine, and some paperwork confusion is not going to change that." But as I watched her storm away in her expensive high heels, I noticed something I had never seen before in my sister's eyes: genuine fear. I could not sleep for the next 3 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Judge Hawkins' puzzled expression and heard her words about 12 properties echoing in my mind. 12 properties. How was that possible? Grandmother Sarah lived in a modest house on Maple Street, drove a 15-year-old Toyota Camry, and shopped for groceries with coupons clipped from the Sunday newspaper. On the first morning after the hearing, I drove to the county clerk's office, a sprawling brick building downtown that smelled of copy toner and bureaucracy. I had been there many times in my work as an accountant, helping clients research property tax records and business licenses, but this time I was searching for answers about my own family. The records clerk, a patient woman named Deborah with kind eyes and silver hair, helped me access the property database. "What name are you searching under, honey?" she asked, her fingers poised over the keyboard. "Sarah Elizabeth Morrison," I replied, giving her grandmother Sarah's full legal name. What appeared on the screen made my mouth fall open. Property after property, purchase after purchase, dating back over 40 years. Grandmother Sarah had not just owned the house on Maple Street. She had owned rental properties scattered across 3 counties, small apartment buildings, single-family homes, even a few commercial spaces downtown. "My goodness," Deborah whispered, scrolling through the extensive list. "Your grandmother was quite the real estate investor, was not she?" I printed every record, spending over $60 in copying fees, and drove straight to Grandmother Sarah's house. For the first time since the funeral, I had a key and permission to enter. The house felt different without her presence, quieter and somehow smaller, but her scent still lingered faintly in the air, that combination of lavender soap and the peppermint tea she drank every evening. I went directly to her bedroom and began searching through her belongings with the desperation of a treasure hunter. In the bottom drawer of her antique dresser, beneath carefully folded quilts her mother had made, I found what I was looking for: a small metal box containing dozens of keys and a stack of handwritten notebooks. The notebooks were a revelation. In Grandmother Sarah's careful cursive handwriting, every property purchase was documented. The first entry was dated March 1983. Purchased 412 Oak Street for $8,500. Seller was Mrs. Henderson, widow, needing quick sale to pay medical bills. Property needs new roof and plumbing work. As I read through the notebooks, a picture emerged of a woman I had never fully understood. Grandmother Sarah had been buying distressed properties for decades, often helping desperate sellers who needed cash quickly. She would purchase their homes at fair prices, renovate them herself, or hire local contractors she trusted, then rent them to families who could not qualify for traditional mortgages. Entry after entry told the same story. Purchased 1247 Pine Avenue for $12,000. Young couple divorcing, needed to sell quickly. Fixed foundation problems and painted throughout. Renting to single mother with 3 children, $250 per month. She had not been taking advantage of people in desperate situations. She had been helping them while building something larger for her family. Every property was maintained meticulously, every tenant treated fairly, every rent payment recorded precisely. This was not the work of a greedy landlord, but of a woman who understood that shelter was a basic human need. The final notebook, the one covering the last 5 years, contained entries that made my throat tighten with emotion. She had written about my parents' occasional visits, noting how they always seemed interested in discussing her plans for the future, and whether she had enough money for her care. She wrote about Charlotte's rare phone calls, how they always seemed to end with requests for loans or advances on inheritance. But the entries about me were different. Reginald moved into the guest room today. Says he wants to help, but I think he just wants to make sure I am safe. Found him reading to me this afternoon when he thought I was napping. He has his grandfather's gentle heart. I found the key to her safety deposit box taped inside the cover of the final notebook, along with a hand-drawn map showing the location of important documents hidden throughout the house. In her linen closet behind towels that smelled of fabric softener, I discovered folders containing property deeds, rental agreements, and financial statements that revealed the true scope of her empire. Grandmother Sarah had been wealthy. Not millionaire wealthy, but comfortable enough that she never needed to worry about money again. The rental income from 11 properties, combined with her late husband's pension and Social Security, had provided her with financial security she had never flaunted or discussed. The next morning I met with Thomas Bradley, the manager at First National Bank, where Grandmother Sarah had maintained her safety deposit box for over 30 years. Thomas was a tall man with kind eyes and a firm handshake who had known my grandmother personally. Sarah was one of our most valued customers, he told me as we walked to the vault area. Always paid her bills on time, never bounced a check, and helped several other customers over the years who were struggling financially. She had a heart of gold and a head for business. The safety deposit box contained the original deeds to all 12 properties, along with detailed financial records showing rental income, maintenance expenses, and property tax payments dating back decades. There were also personal letters, including one addressed to me in Grandmother Sarah's handwriting with "to be opened after my death" written on the envelope. I waited until I was alone in my car to read it. The letter was dated just 2 months before she died, during one of her clear periods when the dementia temporarily retreated. My dearest Reginald, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I pray that you have discovered the truth about what I have built for our family. I never spoke of these properties because I wanted to see who would love me for myself, not for what I could provide. You have proven your heart by caring for me when I needed you most, asking for nothing in return. Charlotte and your parents loved the idea of inheriting money, but you loved me enough to sacrifice your own comfort to ensure I was not alone. That is the difference between greed and love. I sat in the bank parking lot, tears streaming down my face, understanding for the first time that Grandmother Sarah had been testing us all along. She had been watching, evaluating, deciding who truly deserved the legacy she had spent 40 years building. Meanwhile, Charlotte was making phone calls. I learned this later from Benjamin Walsh, the family lawyer who called me that evening with concern in his voice. "Reginald, I need to warn you about something," Benjamin said, his usually steady voice trembling slightly. "Your sister has been calling my office repeatedly, demanding to know why the will was incomplete. She hired a lawyer from downtown, some expensive fellow named Marcus Stone. and they are asking very pointed questions about your grandmother's mental capacity during her final years. Marcus Stone. I recognized the name from billboards around the city advertising his services for complex estate litigation. This was not some general practice attorney. This was a specialist who charged premium fees for disputing wills and challenging inheritances. Charlotte was not giving up. She was escalating. But as I drove home that evening with boxes of documents filling my back seat, I realized something important. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was not the one at a disadvantage. Knowledge was power, and now I knew the truth about what Grandmother Sarah had really left behind. The question was what Charlotte and my parents would do when they discovered they had been fighting over one house while ignoring an entire real estate empire worth millions of dollars. When we returned to court 3 days later, the atmosphere felt electric with tension. Charlotte arrived wearing a different expensive suit this time, charcoal gray with silver buttons that caught the morning light streaming through the tall courtroom windows. Beside her sat Marcus Stone, her new attorney, a man in his 50s with perfectly styled silver hair and a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. My parents sat directly behind Charlotte Harold wearing his best tie, and Dorothy clutching her purse like it contained the crown jewels. They kept glancing at me with expressions I could not quite read, something between confusion and growing concern. I had spent the previous evening with a new attorney of my own, Catherine Morrison, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in estate law and had agreed to take my case after reviewing the documents I had discovered. Catherine was nothing like Marcus Stone's flashy appearance. She wore a simple navy blazer, carried a worn leather briefcase, and spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who relied on facts rather than theatrics. Judge Hawkins entered the courtroom carrying the thick folder Amanda had retrieved along with several additional binders that suggested she had been conducting her own extensive research. Her expression was serious but unreadable as she took her seat behind the bench. After reviewing the complete estate documentation, Judge Hawkins began, her voice filling the silent courtroom. I have discovered that this case involves significantly more complexity than was initially presented to this court. She opened the main folder and began reading directly from Grandmother Sarah's will, but not the abbreviated version Benjamin Walsh had shared with us weeks ago. This was the complete document, including sections that had been filed separately with different attorneys over the years. The last will and testament of Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, dated March 15, 2021, states clearly that the inheritor of her real estate portfolio must meet specific conditions relating to care and companionship. Provided during her final years, Judge Hawkins read, her voice growing more serious with each word. Charlotte shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Marcus Stone leaned forward, his confident expression beginning to show cracks. Specifically, the judge continued, the will states that the beneficiary must have provided consistent loving care and regular companionship during the final 3 years of the testator's life, demonstrating genuine affection rather than obligation or expectation of financial reward. The words hit like hammer blows. Genuine affection rather than expectation of financial reward. Grandmother Sarah had not just been testing our love. She had been documenting our motivations. Judge Hawkins called for witness testimony to establish the facts about each family member's involvement in Grandmother Sarah's care. The first witness was Margaret Phillips, the head nurse at Riverside Medical Center, where Grandmother Sarah had been treated for her dementia. Margaret was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and eyes that had seen decades of family drama played out in hospital corridors. She testified with the calm authority of someone who had no reason to lie. During the 3 years Mrs. Morrison was under our care, Mr. Reginald Morrison was listed as her primary emergency contact and medical decision-maker. Margaret stated, consulting her records. He attended every doctor's appointment, asked detailed questions about her medications, and ensured she never missed a scheduled visit. He was present during both of her brief hospitalizations and stayed overnight in her room. And what about other family members? Catherine Morrison asked. Ms. Charlotte Morrison visited the hospital exactly twice during those 3 years. Both visits lasted less than 1 hour. Mr. and Mrs. Harold Morrison visited approximately once per month, usually when Mrs. Sarah Morrison had medical emergencies. The testimony was devastating in its precision. Margaret described how I had researched dementia care techniques, how I had asked about support groups for family members, how I had requested educational materials to better understand grandmother Sarah's condition. In contrast, Charlotte's 2 visits had been brief social calls where she spent most of the time discussing her career in Seattle. The next witness was Father Miguel Rodriguez from St. Mary's Catholic Church, where grandmother Sarah had been a parishioner for over 50 years. Father Rodriguez was a gentleman in his 70s who had visited grandmother Sarah regularly during her illness. Mrs. Morrison spoke often about her grandson Reginald during my visits, Father Rodriguez testified. She was grateful for his presence and worried about the sacrifices he was making to care for her. She mentioned that he had turned down a promotion at his job because it would require traveling, and she did not want him to limit his opportunities for her sake. This was news to me. I had never told grandmother Sarah about the promotion offer from Henderson and Associates that would have required me to relocate to their Chicago office. Somehow she had known and had been concerned about how caring for her might affect my career. Did Mrs. Morrison ever mention her other family members? Catherine asked. Father Rodriguez looked uncomfortable but answered honestly. She expressed sadness that her son and daughter-in-law seemed more interested in discussing her financial affairs than her health, and she was disappointed that her granddaughter Charlotte rarely called, especially during holidays and her birthday. Marcus Stone objected repeatedly during the testimony, arguing that emotional factors should not influence legal inheritance, but Judge Hawkins overruled him each time. The will's language was specific about the conditions required for inheritance, and those conditions were clearly defined around care and companionship. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the psychiatrist who had evaluated grandmother Sarah's mental capacity 6 months before her death. Dr. Chen was a professional woman in her 40s who had conducted a comprehensive assessment to ensure grandmother Sarah was competent to make legal decisions. Mrs. Morrison was experiencing mild cognitive decline consistent with early-stage dementia, but she remained fully capable of understanding complex financial and legal matters, Dr. Chen testified. During our evaluation, she spoke extensively about her family relationships and her concerns about inheritance. She was particularly articulate about wanting to reward family members who had shown genuine love, rather than those who seemed motivated by financial gain. Did she mention specific family members by name? Catherine asked. Yes. She spoke about her grandson Reginald with great affection, describing his selfless care and emotional support. She also expressed disappointment about her granddaughter Charlotte, whom she felt had become distant and seemed primarily interested in eventual inheritance rather than maintaining a relationship. The testimony revealed that grandmother Sarah had been mentally sharp enough to make deliberate, informed decisions about her will right up until her final months. This eliminated any possibility that her judgment had been impaired or that she had been manipulated. During a brief recess, I watched Charlotte and Marcus Stone huddled in intense conversation near the courtroom windows. Charlotte's face was flushed with anger and what looked like growing panic. She kept glancing at me with an expression that had evolved from triumphant confidence to barely controlled rage. My parents approached me during the break, their faces pale with growing realization. Reginald. We had no idea about these other properties. Dorothy said, her voice shaking slightly. Your grandmother never mentioned owning anything besides the house. Harold nodded vigorously. We always assumed she was just getting by on pension and Social Security. She lived so modestly drove that old car never spent money on herself. But their concern felt hollow to me now. Even if they had not known about grandmother Sarah's wealth, their behavior during her illness spoke volumes about their priorities. They had visited dutifully but briefly, always asking about her plans and her finances, rather than simply spending time with a woman who was slowly losing her memories. When court resumed, Judge Hawkins made an announcement that sent shockwaves through our family. Based on the evidence presented, including witness testimony and documented medical records, it is clear that only one family member met the conditions specified in Mrs. Sarah Morrison's will. She stated, looking directly at me. Mr. Reginald Morrison provided consistent, loving care during his grandmother's final years, while other family members maintained minimal contact. Charlotte stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. Family relationships are complicated, and geographical distance made it difficult for me to visit regularly. That does not mean I loved my grandmother any less. Judge Hawkins regarded her with a steady gaze. Ms. Morrison, your grandmother's will was very specific about the requirements for inheritance. Love that is not expressed through action and presence during times of need does not meet the legal standards she established. But then Marcus Stone stood and played what he clearly believed was his trump card. Your Honor, we request a psychiatric evaluation of Mr. Reginald Morrison to determine whether he exerted undue influence over an elderly woman with diminishing mental capacity. We believe he manipulated his grandmother into changing her will to benefit himself while excluding other rightful heirs. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. After 3 years of sacrifice, after giving up career opportunities and social life to ensure grandmother Sarah was never alone during her illness, my own family was accusing me of manipulation and fraud. Judge Hawkins looked at Marcus Stone with an expression that could freeze water. Counselor, are you suggesting that providing loving care to an elderly family member constitutes undue influence? Because if so, you are arguing that Mr. Morrison should have neglected his grandmother to avoid suspicion of manipulation. Not neglect, Your Honor, but his actions appear calculated to secure financial gain. Then you will need to present evidence supporting that accusation, Judge Hawkins replied coldly. Because the evidence I have reviewed suggests exactly the opposite, that Mr. Morrison provided care without knowledge of his grandmother's full financial situation and without expectation of inheritance. As the hearing concluded for the day, I realized that Charlotte and my parents were not going to accept defeat gracefully. They were preparing to fight dirty to attack my character and motivations in ways that would damage our family relationships permanently. But I also realized something else. Grandmother Sarah had anticipated this reaction. She had documented everything, carefully created legal conditions that would protect her true wishes, and ensured that her legacy would go to the person who had earned it through love rather than expectation. The battle for grandmother Sarah's inheritance was far from over, but for the first time I understood that she had given me more than just property deeds and bank accounts. She had given me the legal and moral foundation to fight for what was right. The war began in earnest the next morning. I discovered this when Catherine Morrison called me at 7:30, her usually calm voice tight with controlled anger. Reginald, we have a problem, she said without preamble. Marcus Stone filed an emergency motion last night, claiming you have been stealing from your grandmother's accounts. He is requesting a full forensic audit of her finances during the time you lived in her house. My coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering against the kitchen floor of my apartment. Coffee splashed across the white tiles like blood at a crime scene. That is impossible. I never touched her money except to pay for groceries and medical expenses, and I have receipts for everything. I believe you, but they are playing hardball now. Stone also filed a motion to have your grandmother declared mentally incompetent at the time she made her will, which would invalidate all the conditions about care and companionship. This was character assassination disguised as legal strategy. Charlotte and my parents were not just fighting for inheritance anymore. They were trying to destroy my reputation and paint me as a thief who had taken advantage of an elderly woman with dementia. I spent the morning gathering every receipt, every bank statement, every piece of documentation related to my time caring for grandmother Sarah. During those 3 years, I had kept meticulous records of every expense, partly because of my training as an accountant and partly because I wanted to be completely transparent about any money I spent on her behalf. The records told the story of someone who had sacrificed financially to provide care. I had paid for groceries, medications, home maintenance, and medical co-pays out of my own pocket dozens of times when grandmother Sarah forgot to bring her purse or when her checks were delayed. Far from stealing from her, I had spent thousands of my own dollars to ensure she had everything she needed. But Marcus Stone was not interested in truth. He was building a narrative designed to create reasonable doubt about my motivations. At the emergency hearing that afternoon, he presented his case with the polished confidence of a prosecutor trying a criminal. Your Honor, Mr. Reginald Morrison had unlimited access to his grandmother's home, her mail, her financial accounts, and her personal papers for 3 consecutive years. Stone argued, pacing in front of the judge's bench like a big cat stalking prey. During this time, Mrs. Sarah Morrison's mental capacity was declining due to dementia, making her vulnerable to manipulation and financial exploitation. He produced bank records showing regular cash withdrawals from grandmother Sarah's checking account during the months I lived with her. On paper, without context, the pattern looked suspicious. $200 here, $300 there, sometimes twice in 1 week. These withdrawals increased significantly after Mr. Morrison moved into the residence. Stone continued, suggesting a pattern of financial abuse disguised as caregiving. Catherine Morrison was ready for this attack. She had spent the previous evening reviewing the same bank records alongside my personal documentation. Your Honor, Mr. Stone is presenting facts without context, Catherine replied, her voice steady and professional. Those cash withdrawals correspond precisely to documented medical and household expenses. Mr. Morrison has receipts for every dollar, and many of those expenses were actually paid from his own funds when his grandmother's cash ran low. She presented a detailed spreadsheet I had prepared, showing each withdrawal alongside corresponding expenses, doctor visits, prescription medications, physical therapy sessions, medical equipment rentals, and household necessities. Rather than revealing theft, the record showed how I had managed grandmother Sarah's money more carefully than she had managed it herself during her periods of confusion. Furthermore, Catherine continued, Mr. Morrison actually spent approximately $4,000 of his own money on his grandmother's care during those 3 years, money he has never requested to be reimbursed. But Stone was not finished. He called Charlotte to testify about my suspicious behavior during family visits. Charlotte took the witness stand wearing a conservative blue dress and minimal makeup, clearly trying to project an image of responsible concern rather than greed. Her testimony was carefully crafted to sound worried rather than accusatory. I became concerned about Reginald's influence over our grandmother during my visits, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. He would answer questions for her when she was perfectly capable of speaking, and he seemed to monitor her phone calls. When I suggested she might be more comfortable in a professional care facility where trained nurses could help her, he became defensive and angry. This was a masterful distortion of reality. I had indeed answered questions for grandmother Sarah during her periods of confusion, but only to spare her the embarrassment and frustration of struggling to remember details. And I had opposed the idea of a care facility because grandmother Sarah had repeatedly expressed her desire to remain in her own home, surrounded by familiar belongings and memories. Did you ever observe your grandmother expressing fear of your brother? Stone asked. Charlotte hesitated for just a moment, and I saw the calculation in her eyes as she decided how far she was willing to go. She seemed anxious when he was around, like she felt obligated to agree with him. I think she was afraid of disappointing him or making him angry. It was a lie, and we both knew it. But it was a carefully constructed lie designed to plant seeds of doubt about my character and motivations. My parents testified next, and their betrayal cut deeper than Charlotte's lies because it felt more personal. Harold and Dorothy had visited regularly enough to witness my care for grandmother Sarah. Yet they now painted a picture of me as controlling and possessive. Reginald seemed to take over Sarah's life completely. Dorothy testified, her voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine emotion. He made decisions about her medical care, her daily routine, even who could visit and when. We worried that he was isolating her from the rest of the family. Harold nodded in agreement. When we suggested Sarah might benefit from social activities at the senior center, Reginald said she was too fragile to leave the house. But she seemed perfectly alert and capable during our visits. Again, this was truth, twisted beyond recognition. I had been protective of grandmother Sarah's energy and emotional well-being because dementia patients often became exhausted and confused in unfamiliar environments. The senior center activities they mentioned would have required transportation, supervision, and medication management that my parents had never volunteered to provide. But the most devastating moment came when Stone presented what he claimed was evidence of my manipulation of grandmother Sarah's legal decisions. Your Honor, we have obtained testimony from Mrs. Morrison's former attorney Benjamin Walsh, indicating that Mr. Reginald Morrison was present during discussions about updating her will and that he actively participated in conversations about inheritance planning. Benjamin Walsh looked uncomfortable as he took the witness stand. He was a man in his 70s who had known our family for decades, and I could see the conflict in his eyes as Stone questioned him. Mr. Walsh, did Reginald Morrison accompany his grandmother to meetings in your office during her final years? Yes, he did, Benjamin replied quietly. And did he participate in discussions about her will and estate planning? He was present during some conversations, yes. Did he ever make suggestions about how Mrs. Morrison's assets should be distributed? Singu. Benjamin hesitated, clearly aware that his answer could be misinterpreted. He asked questions about ensuring his grandmother's wishes were properly documented and legally protected. Stone smiled like a shark, sensing blood in the water. So, Mr. Morrison was actively involved in shaping the very will that now benefits him exclusively. Is that your testimony? That is not what I said, Benjamin replied firmly, but the damage was done. Stone had created the impression that I had manipulated an elderly woman with dementia into changing her will to exclude other family members. As the hearing concluded, I felt like I had been run over by a freight train. In a single afternoon, my family had painted me as a thief, a manipulator, and an abuser who had taken advantage of a vulnerable elderly woman. The fact that none of it was true seemed almost irrelevant compared to how convincing their lies sounded in the formal setting of a courtroom. But as I walked to my car that evening, something inside me hardened into resolve. Charlotte and my parents had declared war, and they were fighting with lies, distortions, and character assassination. They were betting that I would be too decent, too honest, too concerned about family relationships to fight back with equal force. They were wrong. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Catherine Morrison and told her I wanted to fight back, but I wanted to do it with truth rather than lies. If my family was going to destroy our relationships permanently, at least I would ensure that justice prevailed in the end. What do you have in mind? Catherine asked. I want to investigate their motivations, I replied. Charlotte did not suddenly decide she deserved that house out of love for grandmother Sarah. There has to be a reason she needs money desperately enough to lie in court. Catherine was quiet for a moment. That could open doors we cannot close, Reginald. Are you prepared for what we might find? They opened this door when they accused me of theft and manipulation, I replied. Now I want to know why they are really fighting so hard for money they never knew existed. Within 48 hours, Catherine had hired a private investigator named Lucas Brennan, a former police detective who specialized in financial background checks and asset investigations. What Lucas discovered about Charlotte's life in Seattle was eye-opening and explained everything about her desperate need for grandmother Sarah's inheritance. Charlotte was not the successful marketing professional she claimed to be. She had been unemployed for 8 months after being fired from her tech startup job for falsifying client reports. Her Seattle apartment, which she had always described as a successful professional's downtown residence, was actually a cramped studio in a questionable neighborhood that she was 3 months behind on rent. But the most damaging discovery was Charlotte's debt situation. She owed over $60,000 in credit card debt, had defaulted on a car loan, and was facing garnishment of her unemployment benefits. She had also taken out a personal loan using grandmother Sarah's house as collateral, a loan that would come due within 90 days. Charlotte was not fighting for inheritance out of greed or family favoritism. She was fighting to avoid bankruptcy and financial ruin. My parents' motivations were equally clear once Lucas investigated their finances. See, Harold and Dorothy had promised to help Charlotte with her debts, but their own retirement funds had been depleted by poor investment decisions, and unexpected medical expenses. They needed Charlotte to inherit grandmother Sarah's estate so they could fulfill their promise to bail out their favorite daughter. The family's united front against me was not about love or fairness or legal rights. It was about desperation, debt, and the fear of financial consequences they had hidden from everyone, including each other. Armed with this information, Catherine and I prepared for the next phase of our legal battle. But we also prepared for something more important, exposing the truth about why Charlotte and my parents were willing to lie, cheat, and destroy family relationships for money they had never earned. The war was about to escalate, but now I had weapons that could end it decisively. The next court session felt like the climax of a thriller movie, except the stakes were real, and the consequences would destroy relationships that had taken decades to build. I arrived early and watched as Charlotte and Marcus Stone set up their presentation materials with the confidence of generals preparing for a decisive battle. Catherine Morrison had advised me to remain calm regardless of what accusations were thrown at me. Truth has a way of rising to the surface, she had told me the night before. But sometimes you have to dig deep to find it. Judge Hawkins called the session to order and immediately addressed the elephant in the room. Before we proceed with testimony, I want to review some additional evidence that has been brought to my attention. She gestured to Catherine, who stood and approached the bench with a thick folder and what appeared to be several electronic devices. Your Honor, we have discovered evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud in this case, Catherine announced, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a knife through silk. We have audio recordings of the plaintiffs discussing plans to fabricate evidence and bribe witnesses to support their claims. The words hit like lightning. Charlotte's face went white, and Marcus Stone jumped to his feet so quickly his chair toppled backward. Objection, Your Honor. We have had no notification of any recordings, and their authenticity cannot be verified without proper chain of custody documentation. Judge Hawkins regarded him coolly. Mr. Stone, if recordings exist that document criminal conspiracy related to this case, I will certainly review them. Ms. Morrison, please proceed. Catherine activated a small digital recording device, and suddenly Charlotte's voice filled the courtroom with crystal clarity. We need to make this look convincing, Dad. Reginald is not stupid, and that judge seems suspicious already. If we can prove he was stealing Grandma's money, or at least create enough doubt, we can get the inheritance invalidated. Harold's voice responded, but what if he really does have receipts for everything? You know how obsessive he is about record-keeping. Then we find another angle, Charlotte replied, her voice cold and calculating. Benjamin Walsh mentioned that Reginald was present during will discussions. We can twist that into undue influence. And if that does not work, we pay Jessica Patterson to say she witnessed him yelling at Grandma or taking money from her purse. The recording continued for almost 10 minutes, documenting Charlotte and my parents planning to fabricate evidence, commit perjury, and bribe neighbors to provide false testimony. Their voices were clear, their intentions unmistakable, and their casual discussion of criminal activity was breathtaking in its audacity. Charlotte looked like she was about to vomit. My parents sat frozen in their seats, Harold's face turning an alarming shade of red, while Dorothy clutched her chest as if having difficulty breathing. But Catherine was not finished. She produced bank records showing that Charlotte had taken out a personal loan using Grandmother Sarah's house as collateral without informing anyone in the family. The loan documents revealed that Charlotte owed nearly $90,000 to a private lending company, with the house on Maple Street listed as the primary asset securing the debt. Your Honor, Ms. Charlotte Morrison was not fighting for inheritance out of love or legal entitlement. Catherine stated, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. She was fighting to avoid bankruptcy and criminal charges for fraudulent borrowing. She used her grandmother's property as collateral for personal loans without permission or legal authority. Marcus Stone was objecting frantically, but Judge Hawkins waved him silent. The evidence was overwhelming, and everyone in the courtroom could see that Charlotte's motivations had nothing to do with family love or rightful inheritance. Then Catherine played her trump card. From her briefcase, she produced a tablet computer and set it on the evidence table where everyone could see the screen. Your Honor, we also have video evidence that Mrs. Sarah Morrison recorded 2 weeks before her death, specifically addressing concerns about her family's motivations and her inheritance decisions. The video began playing, and Grandmother Sarah's face appeared on the screen, sitting in her favorite chair in the living room I knew so well. She looked directly into the camera with eyes that were completely clear and alert, her voice steady and strong. My name is Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, and today is October 3rd, 2023. I am recording this video because I want there to be no doubt about my mental capacity or my intentions regarding my estate. She paused, folding her hands in her lap with the dignity I remembered so well. I have been blessed to accumulate significant property and financial assets during my lifetime, assets that I have never discussed with my family because I wanted to observe their true characters without the influence of expected inheritance. For 3 years, my grandson Reginald has cared for me during my illness with patience, love, and complete selflessness. He has never asked about my finances, never suggested that I should plan for the future in ways that would benefit him, and never shown any interest in my estate planning. The video continued with Grandmother Sarah describing each family member's behavior during her illness with painful honesty. My granddaughter Charlotte has called me 6 times in the past year, and 4 of those calls included requests for money or discussions about when I plan to update my affairs. She has shown no interest in my health, my daily life, or my emotional well-being. She looked directly into the camera with an expression of profound sadness. My son Harold and daughter-in-law Dorothy visit me dutifully, but their conversations always turn to practical matters, whether I have enough money for care, whether I have made arrangements for my property, whether I need help managing my finances. They have never simply spent time with me for the joy of family connection. The most devastating part of the video came when Grandmother Sarah addressed the inheritance directly. I am leaving my estate to Reginald not because he is perfect, but because he has proven his love through action rather than words. He has sacrificed his career opportunities, his social life, and his financial security to ensure that I am not alone during the most frightening time of my life. That is the behavior of someone who deserves to be trusted with the legacy I have built. The video ended with Grandmother Sarah looking directly into the camera with an expression of absolute clarity and determination. If anyone contests this inheritance based on claims that I was mentally incompetent or that Reginald manipulated me, they are lying to serve their own financial interests. I am recording this video precisely to prevent such lies from succeeding. The courtroom was completely silent when the video ended. Charlotte was crying openly, but they were tears of humiliation rather than grief. My parents looked like they had aged 10 years in the past hour. Judge Hawkins studied the evidence for several long minutes before speaking. Mr. Stone, do you wish to present any evidence that contradicts what we have just seen and heard? Marcus Stone looked like a man whose entire strategy had just collapsed. Your Honor, we would need time to authenticate these recordings and investigate their chain of custody. I see. And do you have any evidence to present regarding your client's use of the disputed property as collateral for personal loans without legal authority, Sami? Stone said nothing. Judge Hawkins turned to Charlotte, her expression stern but not unkind. Ms. Morrison, you have accused your brother of theft, manipulation, and elder abuse. You have conspired to present false evidence in my courtroom. And you have illegally used property that was never yours as collateral for personal debts. Do you have anything to say in response to these allegations? Charlotte stood slowly, her designer suit wrinkled and her makeup streaked with tears. For a moment I thought she might finally tell the truth, might acknowledge what she had done and express genuine remorse. Instead, she looked at me with pure hatred. Reginald always was Grandma's favorite, she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. He manipulated her into believing he was the only one who cared about her. He turned her against her own family and poisoned her mind with lies about our motivations. Even in defeat, even confronted with overwhelming evidence of her own lies and criminal behavior, Charlotte could not accept responsibility for her actions. She was doubling down on victimhood and blame, painting herself as the wronged party in a situation where she had committed fraud. Judge Hawkins had heard enough. Ms. Morrison, based on the evidence presented in this courtroom, you have committed several serious crimes, including conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, and unauthorized use of property as loan collateral. I am referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. She turned to my parents, her expression equally severe. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, you have participated in conspiracy to present false evidence in my courtroom. While I understand that financial desperation can drive people to make poor choices, ignorance of the law is not a legal defense. Then Judge Hawkins addressed the inheritance directly. The evidence clearly establishes that Sarah Elizabeth Morrison was mentally competent when she created her will, and that her decisions were based on careful observation of her family members' behavior over many years. The conditions she established for inheritance were met exclusively by her grandson Reginald Morrison, who provided loving care without knowledge of financial reward and without expectation of inheritance. She paused, looking directly at me. Mr. Morrison, I am awarding you the entire estate of Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, including all 12 properties and associated financial assets. Furthermore, I am ordering Ms. Charlotte Morrison to pay your legal fees as compensation for the fraudulent claims that necessitated this litigation. The gavel fell with finality that echoed through the silent courtroom. After months of accusations, lies, and family betrayal, justice had prevailed. But as I looked at Charlotte's tear-streaked face and my parents' expressions of shock and humiliation, I realized that winning the legal battle had come at a cost that could never be repaid. Our family relationships had been destroyed by greed, desperation, and the willingness to choose money over love. Grandmother Sarah had been right about all of us. She had seen our true characters more clearly than we had seen them ourselves. The weeks following Judge Hawkins's decision felt like living in the aftermath of a natural disaster. The legal victory was complete and decisive, but the emotional wreckage left behind touched every aspect of my life and relationships. Charlotte's criminal charges proceeded swiftly through the district attorney's office. The evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud was overwhelming, and her unauthorized use of grandmother Sarah's property as loan collateral constituted a serious felony. Her lawyer negotiated a plea agreement that included restitution community service and a suspended jail sentence contingent on her staying out of legal trouble for 5 years. More importantly for my situation, the plea agreement required Charlotte to immediately resolve the fraudulent loans she had taken against the house on Maple Street. The private lending company, faced with evidence that their collateral had been pledged without legal authority, had no choice but to cancel the debt and pursue Charlotte personally for recovery. My parents faced misdemeanor charges for conspiracy, but Judge Hawkins ultimately accepted their argument that they had been influenced by Charlotte's desperation rather than acting from purely criminal motives. They received probation and were required to pay a portion of my legal fees, a financial burden that strained their already precarious retirement budget. The most satisfying aspect of the legal resolution was also the most painful, watching my family face the consequences of choices that had revealed their true characters under pressure. Charlotte was forced to declare bankruptcy anyway. Without grandmother Sarah's inheritance to resolve her debts, she lost her Seattle apartment, her car, and most of her personal possessions. She moved back to our hometown and took a minimum wage job at a call center, living in a studio apartment that was smaller and shabbier than the house she had tried to steal from me. But the real revelation came when I began managing grandmother Sarah's estate and discovered the true scope of what she had built over 4 decades. The 12 properties were worth approximately $4.2 million in total market value. The rental income, even after expenses and property taxes, generated nearly $30,000 per month in net revenue. Grandmother Sarah had been wealthy enough to live comfortably without working, yet she had chosen to maintain a modest lifestyle and reinvest her profits into additional properties and community charitable work. Working with property manager Helen Martinez, who had been handling day-to-day operations for several of grandmother Sarah's rental properties, I learned about the extent of my grandmother's quiet generosity. She had provided below-market rent to struggling families, had personally paid for emergency repairs in tenant homes, and had never evicted anyone for late payment without first trying to help them resolve their financial problems. Your grandmother was the best landlord I ever worked with, Helen told me during our first meeting in her small office downtown. She understood that housing is about more than money. These properties provided homes for families who could not qualify for traditional mortgages, single mothers starting over after divorce, elderly people on fixed incomes who needed affordable rent. Helen showed me files documenting dozens of cases where grandmother Sarah had gone above and beyond normal landlord responsibilities. She had paid for medical bills when tenants faced health crises, had provided interest-free loans for car repairs and educational expenses, and had even helped several tenants eventually purchase their own homes by serving as a character reference and co-signer. This was the legacy Charlotte and my parents had been willing to destroy with lies and fraud. Not just money and property, but a 40-year mission of providing stable housing and community support to people who needed help. The local newspaper, the Herald Tribune, ran a feature story about grandmother Sarah's hidden philanthropy after reporter David Thompson investigated the estate case and discovered the broader community impact of her work. The article, titled "The Landlord Who Changed Lives," interviewed current and former tenants who described how grandmother Sarah's fairness and generosity had helped them through difficult periods. Reading their stories, I realized that inheriting her estate was not just about financial security for me. It was about continuing a mission of community service that had been her life's work. I made the decision to honor her memory by establishing the Sarah Elizabeth Morrison Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing financial exploitation of elderly people and providing emergency assistance to families facing housing insecurity. The Foundation's first initiative was a free legal clinic for seniors who suspected they were being financially abused by family members or caregivers. The irony was not lost on me that my family's attempt to steal from grandmother Sarah had led to greater protection for other elderly people facing similar threats. 6 months after the court decision, Charlotte made an unexpected phone call. I was working in the house on Maple Street, which I had decided to keep as my primary residence rather than sell, when she called on a Thursday evening. "Reginald, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice smaller and more uncertain than I had ever heard it. "I know you probably never want to see me again, but I need to apologize for what I did." I was surprised by how little anger I felt. Months of managing grandmother Sarah's legacy had given me perspective on what really mattered, and holding grudges against family members felt less important than moving forward with positive purpose. "What do you want to say?" I asked, not agreeing to meet but not hanging up either. "I want to explain why I acted the way I did, and I want you to know that I understand what I lost," she replied. "Not just the money, but the respect of our family and community, and the relationship with you." We agreed to meet for coffee at a neutral location downtown. Charlotte looked different when she arrived, older, more tired, wearing clothes from discount stores rather than designer boutiques. But there was also something more genuine about her appearance, as if financial pressure had stripped away some of the artificial polish she had maintained for years. "I was desperate," she said without preamble, stirring her coffee with nervous energy. "I had been lying to everyone about my situation in Seattle for over a year. I lost my job, could not find another one, and was facing bankruptcy and eviction. When I heard about Grandma's death, I saw the inheritance as my only way out of financial ruin." She looked directly at me for the first time since sitting down. "I convinced myself that I deserved that house because I was the one with college debt and career struggles, while you had a stable job and seemed to be doing fine financially. I told myself that you had been manipulating Grandma to get the inheritance because it was easier than admitting that you had earned it by actually caring for her." Charlotte's honesty was painful to hear, but it was also the first genuine conversation we had shared in years. "I know now that I was wrong about everything," she continued. "You sacrificed for Grandma when I could not be bothered to visit her. You earned her trust and love through actions, while I just assumed I was entitled to benefit from being family. And you never asked for anything in return." I listened to her confession with mixed emotions. Part of me was relieved to hear her acknowledge the truth. Part of me was sad about the years of fake relationship that had preceded this crisis. And part of me was hopeful that maybe we could rebuild something honest from the wreckage. "What do you want from me now?" I asked. "Nothing," she said quickly. "I am not asking for money or help or forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand what happened and why Grandma made the choice she did. You were the grandson who showed up when it mattered." We talked for another hour about our family history, about the favoritism and competition that had shaped our relationship, about how financial pressure had revealed character weaknesses that might have remained hidden under better circumstances. It was not a reconciliation, but it was a recognition that we were both products of family dynamics that had encouraged rivalry rather than mutual support. My parents took longer to reach a similar understanding. Their embarrassment about the criminal charges and public exposure of their financial situation led to a period of social isolation that lasted most of the following year. They stopped attending church, avoided community events, and seemed to age rapidly under the weight of shame and lost friendships. Eventually, they sent me a written letter acknowledging their mistakes and expressing genuine regret for their behavior during the inheritance dispute. The letter was carefully crafted and probably revised multiple times, but the sentiment felt sincere. Harold wrote, "We realize now that we raised Charlotte to believe she was entitled to special treatment, and we failed to recognize your sacrifices for Mom until it was too late. We let financial desperation cloud our judgment and turn us against the son who had always been reliable and honest." Dorothy added, "Your grandmother saw something in you that we failed to appreciate. You have always been the one who helped without being asked, who took responsibility without seeking credit. We are proud of the man you have become, even though we did not do enough to encourage those qualities when you were growing up." Reading their letter, I realized that our family's crisis had forced all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our relationships. Charlotte had learned that entitlement without effort leads to failure. My parents had learned that favoritism creates resentment and damages family bonds. And I had learned that doing the right thing sometimes requires standing alone against people you love. The inheritance that had initially seemed like a family tragedy had ultimately become an opportunity for growth, honesty, and positive change. Grandmother Sarah had been wiser than any of us realized when she created conditions that would test our characters and reveal our true motivations. Standing in her kitchen one evening cooking dinner while reviewing property management reports, I felt her presence in the house we had shared during her final years. She had known that her death would create a crisis that would either destroy our family or transform it into something more honest and authentic. In the end, she had given me more than financial security. She had given me the opportunity to discover my own strength, to build something meaningful from the legacy she had created, and to help other people facing similar challenges with elder care and family exploitation. The price had been high, but the lessons learned and the positive impact achieved had made the struggle worthwhile. 2 years later, I stood in the same courthouse where our family's battle had played out, but this time I was there for a very different purpose. The Sarah Elizabeth Morrison Foundation was hosting a recognition ceremony for volunteers who had helped launch our elder abuse prevention program, and Judge Patricia Hawkins had agreed to speak about the importance of protecting vulnerable seniors from financial exploitation. The foundation had grown beyond my initial expectations. What started as a legal clinic for elderly people had expanded into a comprehensive support network that included financial counseling, family mediation services, and educational programs for professional caregivers. We had helped over 300 families navigate inheritance disputes, elder abuse situations, and end-of-life care planning. Most importantly, we had prevented dozens of cases similar to what my family had attempted against grandmother Sarah. Adult children who were struggling financially often viewed elderly parents as potential sources of emergency funds. But our counselors helped families have honest conversations about finances and care responsibilities before desperation led to manipulation or fraud. Helen Martinez had become the foundation's director of housing services, helping us convert 3 of grandmother Sarah's properties into affordable assisted living units for seniors who needed minimal care but could not afford commercial facilities. The waiting list for these apartments was 6 months long, and every resident was someone who might otherwise have been forced into inappropriate care situations or financial dependence on family members. The property empire that grandmother Sarah had built continued to generate income that funded our charitable work, while providing me with financial security I had never imagined possible. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that her legacy was helping other families avoid the pain and division that greed had caused in our own relationships. Charlotte had slowly rebuilt her life over the past 2 years. After completing her community service and probation requirements, she found stable employment with a non-profit organization that provided services to homeless women and children. Her work with vulnerable populations had given her perspective on how quickly financial security could disappear and how important family support became during crisis periods. She had also started therapy to address the underlying issues that had contributed to her sense of entitlement and willingness to lie for personal gain. During one of our occasional conversations, she told me that she was finally learning to measure her worth by her actions rather than by her possessions or social status. Working with women who have lost everything has taught me that dignity comes from helping others, not from having more than they do, she said during a phone call last Christmas. I spent so many years thinking I deserved special treatment because I had education and career ambitions, but I never used those advantages to make anyone else's life better. My parents had also found ways to contribute positively to their community after their initial period of shame and isolation. Harold volunteered with a tax preparation service that helped elderly residents understand their financial obligations and avoid scams. Dorothy worked with a grief counseling program that supported people who had lost spouses or family members. Their volunteer work was partly motivated by court-ordered community service, but it had evolved into genuine commitment to helping others avoid the mistakes they had made. Harold told me that working with elderly clients had given him insight into how grandmother Sarah must have felt when her own family seemed more interested in her money than her well-being. I realize now that we treated Mom like a financial plan rather than a person, he admitted during one of our quarterly family dinners. She must have felt so lonely knowing that her children were counting her money while you were just trying to keep her company. These family dinners had become a tradition that helped us maintain relationships while acknowledging the changes in our dynamics. We met every 3 months at a restaurant, keeping the conversations focused on current activities rather than rehashing past conflicts. The relationships were different now, more honest, but also more distant, built on mutual respect rather than assumed obligation. The most unexpected development had been my relationship with Maria Santos, a social worker I met through the Foundation's programming. Maria specialized in family dynamics and elder care, and she had been instrumental in developing our mediation services for families dealing with inheritance conflicts. Maria understood the emotional complexity of what I had experienced because she had witnessed similar family dramas throughout her career. She had seen how financial pressure could transform loving relationships into bitter legal battles, and she appreciated the unique opportunity the Foundation provided to intervene before conflicts escalated to the point of permanent damage. "What your grandmother did was brilliant," Maria told me one evening as we reviewed applications for emergency housing assistance. She created conditions that would reveal everyone's true character, but she also provided you with the resources to build something positive from the conflict that followed. Maria and I had been planning our wedding for the following spring, a small ceremony that would take place in Grandmother Sarah's garden behind the house on Maple Street. The garden had been her pride and joy, filled with roses, tomatoes, and herbs that she had tended for decades. Having our wedding there felt like a way of including her in our celebration, while honoring the home that had become the center of both family conflict and personal growth. The Foundation's success had attracted attention from other communities dealing with similar problems. We had been invited to consult with organizations in 4 different states that wanted to replicate our model of elder abuse prevention and family mediation. The demand for our services highlighted how common these issues were and how few resources existed to address them proactively. Standing at the podium during the Foundation's anniversary celebration, looking out at volunteers, community leaders, and families we had helped over the past 2 years, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that first shocking day in court. I had inherited not just money and property, but responsibility for continuing Grandmother Sarah's mission of helping people who needed support. The inheritance had provided me with financial freedom, but it had also given me purpose that was more fulfilling than any career advancement could have been. Judge Hawkins concluded her remarks by addressing the broader lessons our case had illustrated about family relationships and financial planning. Elder abuse often comes from family members who love their elderly relatives, but who allow desperation or entitlement to override their moral judgment. She said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed countless family tragedies. The best protection for vulnerable seniors is not just legal documentation, but family relationships built on genuine care rather than expectation of inheritance. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and shared stories about their own experiences with elder care, I found myself thinking about Grandmother Sarah's wisdom in creating conditions that would test our family's values under pressure. She could have simply divided her estate equally among all her grandchildren and avoided conflict entirely. Instead, she chose to reward the behavior she wanted to encourage, while exposing the greed and entitlement that had infected our family relationships. The pain of discovering my parents' and sisters' willingness to lie and cheat for money had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. I no longer had to wonder about their true feelings or maintain relationships based on false assumptions about shared values. More importantly, the crisis had revealed my own strength and capacity for forgiveness. I had fought for justice without becoming vindictive, had defended my character without attacking theirs unnecessarily, and had found ways to build positive outcomes from negative circumstances. As Maria and I drove home that evening, passing the affordable housing units that now provided homes for seniors who might otherwise have been financially exploited by their own families, I realized that Grandmother Sarah's greatest gift had not been money or property. Her greatest gift had been the opportunity to discover who I really was when tested by adversity, and the resources to build something meaningful from that knowledge. The house on Maple Street still felt like home, but it also felt like headquarters for a mission that would continue long after I was gone. In her bedroom, now converted to a home office where I managed foundation business, I kept the framed copy of her final letter to me. True inheritance is not what you receive, but what you give to the next generation, she had written. Build something worthy of the love that was invested in you. Every day working to prevent other families from experiencing the pain that greed had caused in our relationships, I tried to honor that instruction. The legacy she had built through 40 years of helping others was growing larger and reaching more people who needed support. In the end, Grandmother Sarah had been right about everything. Character is revealed not in prosperity, but in how we treat people who can do nothing for us. Love must be proven through action, not just declared through words. And the greatest inheritance we can leave is not money, but the example of a life lived with integrity and compassion for others. Standing in her kitchen late that evening, reading applications from families seeking help with elder care challenges, I felt grateful for the difficult journey that had brought me to this purpose. The pain of family betrayal had been the price of discovering my own capacity for strength and service. I hope that sharing my story will help others recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation in their own families and encourage honest conversations about inheritance and elder care before desperation leads to decisions that destroy relationships permanently. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you knew was right? How did you find the strength to stand up for justice when people you loved were asking you to ignore the truth? I would love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting the work we do to protect vulnerable seniors from exploitation. Remember that the greatest inheritance we can give our children is not money, but the example of lives lived with integrity and compassion. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family challenges and finding purpose in adversity. Share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding how to protect elderly family members from financial abuse. Until next time, remember that true wealth comes not from what we accumulate, but from what we contribute to making the world a better place for others.